She did it on a Tuesday, not a dramatic Tuesday, not a holiday or an anniversary of anything, just a regular Tuesday in March when the azaleas in my front yard were starting to bloom and I had a pot of chicken soup on the stove. That was the day my daughter-in-law sat down across from me at my own kitchen table, folded her hands like she was chairing a board meeting, and told me that the house I had lived in for 31 years needed to be sold, and that I needed to agree to it by Friday. I remember I did not say anything right away. I just looked at her hands. She had long nails, always painted, always perfect. That day they were a deep burgundy, the color of old wine. I thought absently that she must have just had them done. My name is Dorothy. I am 67 years old. I taught third grade for 29 years in a small town outside of Columbus, Ohio. I raised one son, my boy Caleb, mostly on my own after his father Raymon passed from a heart attack when Caleb was 16. I paid off this house at 53. I planted every rosebush in this yard. I know which floorboard creaks third from the top of the stairs, and I know that the kitchen window sticks in humidity, and I know that on clear mornings in October the light comes through the back bedroom in a way that makes the whole room look like it's made of honey. This was my home, every inch of it, and she wanted me to sign it away by Friday. Her name was Natalie. Caleb had met her 4 years earlier at a work conference in Phoenix. She was younger than him by 8 years, which I never held against her. She was sharp and confident, and she laughed loudly, and I thought when I first met her that she had a kind of energy I admired. She moved fast. She decided things quickly. She never second-guessed herself, or if she did, she never showed it. They married after 14 months. I was at the wedding. I smiled in every photograph. The first year was fine. They lived in an apartment in the city, 40 minutes from me. Caleb called on Sundays. Natalie sent Christmas cards. We were not close, but we were civil, and I told myself that was enough. That was normal. That was what grown children and their spouses did. Then Caleb lost his job. It was a layoff, not a firing. His whole department was restructured. He called me on a Wednesday night, and his voice had that particular flatness I recognized from when he was a teenager, and something had gone wrong that he did not know how to talk about. I told him it would be fine. I told him he was smart and capable and that something else would come. I meant every word. What I did not expect was the phone call 3 weeks later asking if they could stay with me. Just for a little while, Caleb said. Just until they got back on their feet. Natalie was between projects, he said. The apartment was expensive. It made sense, he said. It was just practical. I said yes. Of course I said yes. He was my son. They arrived on a Saturday with 11 boxes and a pull-behind trailer and a dog I had not been told about. A large, poorly trained golden retriever named Biscuit, who immediately knocked a framed photograph off my hallway table and showed no remorse. I put the photograph back. I did not say anything about the dog. That was 14 months before the Tuesday with the azaleas. The first few weeks were manageable. I cooked dinner, most nights because I had always cooked dinner and because it gave me something to do. Caleb helped with the yard work on weekends. We watched television together in the evenings sometimes, and it felt, briefly, like something good, like family. But Natalie was never comfortable. That is the only way I know to say it. She was never comfortable in a space she did not control. She rearranged the living room furniture without asking. She replaced my dish soap with a brand she preferred. Small things, I told myself. Adjustments. People who are used to their own space take time to settle into someone else's. I gave her time. I gave her a great deal of time. She began making comments about the house. Offhand things. At first, the kitchen was outdated. The bathrooms needed updating. The layout was not functional. I listened and I nodded, and I did not point out that I had lived in this functional, updated enough house for 3 decades without any difficulty. Then the comments shifted. She started talking about the market, how much properties in my neighborhood were selling for, how a house this size, on this lot, with the mature trees and the corner position, could fetch a serious number. She said serious number the way people say it when they mean a number they have already looked up and cannot stop thinking about. I noticed all of this. I simply chose not to react to it, because I am a woman who learned a long time ago that not every fire needs to be fed. Caleb said nothing during any of these conversations. He sat in the same room and looked at his phone or agreed with whatever Natalie was saying in that soft, vague way that is not really agreement, but is also not resistance. Raymond had never been like that. Raymond had been a man who said what he thought, sometimes too loudly and too bluntly, but you always knew where you stood. I used to find that exhausting. I missed it now more than I can describe. The dynamic in the house shifted slowly, the way water carves stone. Not all at once, just steadily every day, a little more pressure in a little more places. Natalie began referring to certain rooms as her space. She started scheduling things in the house without telling me, having her friends over on afternoons. I was home, treating the living room like a conference area for video calls without closing any doors. Biscuit was allowed on the furniture. When I mentioned gently that I would prefer he wasn't, Natalie looked at me with an expression I can only describe as patient condescension. The kind a person uses when they have decided the other person is not worth a real argument. I started spending more time in my bedroom. I am not proud of that. I want to say that plainly, because the top comment on every video like this is always some version of, "Why didn't you just tell them to get out?" And I understand the impulse behind that question. I do. But I want you to understand something about what it feels like to be 67 years old and watching your son look right through you. It is not fear exactly. It is something closer to grief. You keep waiting for him to see you. You keep waiting for him to remember who you are to each other. And while you are waiting, you make yourself smaller, because making yourself smaller feels like keeping the peace, and keeping the peace feels like love. Even when it is not. Even when it is just surrender, wearing love's clothes. The Tuesday morning in March started the same way every morning had started for 14 months. I woke at 6, made coffee, sat at the kitchen table with the newspaper I still had delivered because I am 67 and I am keeping the newspaper. Natalie came down at 8:30 in her workout clothes, poured herself a cup of coffee from the pot I had made, and sat across from me. She folded her hands on the table. She said, "Dorothy, we need to talk about the house." I put down my newspaper. I looked at her. She told me she had spoken with a real estate attorney. She told me she had also spoken with a financial planner. She told me that given the current market and the equity I had built up and the size of the property relative to my needs as a single older woman, the most logical and responsible course of action would be to sell. She had already identified 2 properties she thought would suit me better. Smaller places, she said. Easier to maintain. More appropriate for someone in my situation. She said someone in my situation, as if my situation were a diagnosis. I asked her what exactly she meant by appropriate. She smiled and said, "Dorothy, you're rattling around in a 4-bedroom house by yourself. It's too much house. It doesn't make sense. And frankly, the money you'd free up could set you up really comfortably for the rest of your life." I noticed she said the rest of your life, with the particular lightness of someone who has done the math on how much rest there might actually be. I asked where Caleb was. She said he agreed with her. He thought it was the right move. He was at the gym right now, but she could call him if I needed to hear it from him directly. She said this the way you say it, about a piece of evidence you don't really need to produce because you're certain it exists. I said no. I said I did not need to call him. And I said I would think about what she had said. She nodded and told me she needed an answer by Friday because the attorney had availability and she wanted to move quickly before the spring market peaked. Then she picked up her coffee cup, her perfect burgundy nails curved around the handle, and she walked out of my kitchen. I sat at my table for a long time after that. The soup I had planned to make was still in my head, the chicken thighs thawing on the counter, the vegetables I had meant to chop still sitting in the refrigerator. I did not make the soup that day. I just sat. And I thought about Raymond. Raymond had been a practical man, a careful man, not warm in the way that people write about in cards, not someone who said the right thing at the right moment, but someone who paid attention, who planned. The year before he died, when his own father had been pushed out of his home by a series of circumstances that the family never quite spoke about directly, Raymond had come home one evening, sat across from me at this same kitchen table and said, "Dorothy, I want us to see a lawyer." I had asked him what for. He said, "For the house. I want to make sure that no matter what happens, no matter what shape things are in, this house stays yours. Completely and without question, yours." I had thought he was being morbid. He was only 54. I told him we had time. He said, "I know. I just want to be sure." We went to see the attorney the following month. We set up a living trust. Raymond explained what he wanted carefully, and the attorney explained back what that meant. And when we left, I had a folder of documents that I filed in the bottom drawer of the oak filing cabinet in the study, and mostly did not think about again. Raymond died 11 months later. I had not thought about that folder in several years. I thought about it now. On Wednesday morning, while Natalie was on a video call in the living room and Caleb was doing something in the garage, I went to the study and opened the bottom drawer of the oak filing cabinet and took out the folder. I sat on the edge of the bed in the guest room, the one that had been converted into Natalie's home office, without her noticing the irony, and I read every page. Raymond had done it right. The house was held entirely in a revocable living trust. My name was the only name on it. There was a successor trustee named our longtime attorney, a quiet, precise man named Gerald who had sent me a card every Christmas for 16 years. The documentation was thorough and clear. Natalie could not ask me to sell this house. She had no standing, no claim, no lever to pull. There was nothing to agree to by Friday, because there was nothing to agree to at all. The house was not a negotiation. It never had been. I put the folder back in the drawer. I smoothed the bed where I had been sitting. I went back to the kitchen, and I made the soup. I want to tell you that I felt triumph in that moment. I think that is what people expect. But what I actually felt was something quieter and sadder. I felt the particular ache of realizing that my son had either not known about the trust or had known and had let his wife walk into my kitchen with her folded hands and her Friday deadline anyway. Either way told me something about where I stood in his mind that I was not ready to look at directly. But I looked at it. I made myself look at it. On Thursday afternoon, while Caleb was in the living room and Natalie was upstairs, I called Gerald. He answered on the second ring, the way he always did. I explained the situation concisely. He listened without interrupting. When I finished, he was quiet for a moment, and then he said, "Dorothy, the trust is ironclad. Nothing has changed since Raymond set it up. This house is yours. Anyone who told you otherwise was either mistaken or hoping you didn't know any better." I asked him what my options were. He said, "Well, that depends on what you want." I told him what I wanted. He said he could have the paperwork ready by Monday. Caleb came to find me that evening. Natalie had apparently reported back that the Friday deadline conversation had been less decisive than intended. He sat across from me at the kitchen table in the same chair she had used, and he looked uncomfortable in the way of someone who has been sent to finish a job they did not start. He said, "Mom, I think Natalie has a point. About the house, I think you should think seriously about it." I looked at my son who I had raised largely alone, who I had driven to every baseball practice and every school play and every early morning orthodontist appointment, who I had sat with through Raymond's death when he was 16 and cried on my shoulder for 45 minutes, and then went very still and quiet in a way that worried me for months, who I had loved without condition or caveat for 41 years. I said, "Caleb, do you know how this house is held?" He looked at me blankly. I said, "Your father set up a trust before he died. This house is held in that trust. My name only. It cannot be sold without my consent, and my consent alone. Not yours, not Natalie's. Mine." He was quiet. I said, I want you to understand that I am not going to sell this house. I also want you to understand that I have been thinking very carefully this week about what it means that this conversation happened at all. He started to say something about how Natalie was just trying to help, just being practical, just thinking about my future. I said, Caleb, I love you. I have loved you every day of your life, and I will love you every day of whatever is left of mine. But I need you to hear me when I say this. This is my home. Raymon built it with me. I planted every rose bush in that yard. I am not rattling around in it. I am living in it. And I need you to decide whether you are going to stand in your father's house and tell me I do not belong here, or whether you are going to remember who you are and who I am and what this family is supposed to mean. He did not say anything. I stood up. I told him I was going to bed. I told him dinner was in the refrigerator if they were hungry. I went upstairs. I did not sleep for a long time, but I did not cry either. I had cried enough in the preceding 14 months, quietly in my own bedroom, in my own house, in a way that no one had seen because no one had thought to look. Friday came and went. No paperwork was signed because there was no paperwork to sign. On the Saturday morning following, I came downstairs to find Natalie's coffee cup on the counter, unwashed, as usual. I washed it. I put it away. Then I sat at the kitchen table, and I waited. Natalie came down at 8:40. She looked at me with an expression that was somewhere between irritated and uncertain, the expression of someone who had been expecting a different outcome and was still recalculating. I said, "Good morning." She said, "Dorothy, we really need to resolve this." I said, "Natalie, I spoke with my attorney this week. I want you to know that I understand completely how this house is held and what my rights are. I also want you to know that I have given a great deal of thought to our arrangement here, and I believe it is time we discussed a different plan for your next steps." She stared at me. I told her, calmly and without raising my voice, that I had spoken with Gerald and that the house was legally and permanently mine. I told her that I was asking her and Caleb to begin looking for their own housing and that I was giving them 60 days, which was more than fair, because I was not without compassion, even if she had sometimes made me feel like I needed to justify that. Then I told her that I had also, with Gerald's guidance, updated the trust this week to include a provision that Caleb would need to meet certain conditions of his own to remain a beneficiary upon my death, conditions that had everything to do with his character and nothing to do with his wife's real estate projections. She did not say anything for a very long moment. Then she said, "You have no idea what you're doing." I said, "That is exactly what you were counting on." Caleb moved out 43 days later. He and Natalie rented an apartment in a complex 20 minutes from here. He called me 3 weeks after they left. The conversation was short and careful, the way conversations are when two people are feeling their way back toward each other across a distance that did not used to be there. He said he was sorry. I said I knew. He asked if he could come for dinner on Sunday. I said yes. I said I would make the chicken soup. He came. He sat at the kitchen table and we talked for 2 hours about things that did not include Natalie or real estate or trust documents or anything at all that had happened in the past 14 months. We talked about Raymond. We talked about a road trip we had taken when Caleb was 9, just the two of us, all the way to the Smoky Mountains in a car with no air conditioning and a cooler full of sandwiches I had made the night before. He had forgotten about the sandwiches I had made the night before. He had forgotten about the sandwiches. He cried a little near the end of dinner into his soup. I put my hand on his and I did not say anything because some things do not need to be said. Biscuit, the dog, stayed with them. I am still not sorry about that. I want to say something now to anyone watching this who was older, who was living in their home and feeling slowly unmade in it, who was waiting for someone to see them clearly before they speak up. I want to say, do not wait as long as I did, not because waiting makes you weak, but because your home is not just a structure, it is the accumulation of your life. It is every year you spent choosing curtains and fixing gutters and making soup and sitting with grief and getting up again the next morning. It belongs to you completely. It belongs to you, the way memory belongs to you, the way your name belongs to you. No one can take that, but you have to know that. You have to know it before they walk into your kitchen with their folded hands and their confident smiles and their arbitrary Fridays. Raymon knew it. He knew it before I did, back when we sat across from Gerald in a plain office with fluorescent lighting and signed our names to a document I barely read because I was so sure we had time. He gave me this house twice, once when we bought it, and once when he made sure no one could ever take it from me. I tend the rose bushes every spring. They are doing very well this year.